have to be honest that this parable is probably one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult, teaching in the Synoptic Gospels. In fact, scholars say that at the end of this story, probably the original ending was verse 8, where Jesus says that the children of this world are more prudent with their own generation than the children of light. After that, what we just heard were a series of kind of moral teachings that really kind of reflect how the early church kind of grappled with this teaching as well. And so it gave us kind of like a series, a number of different teachings or interpretations about this. So for me, as I try to grapple with this parable, and you really just kind of scratch the surface into understanding this, I want to begin by understanding this story with a story. And the story I'm going to share with you is a very basic story that is shared by many cultures. I'm just going to give you the bare bones of the story to illustrate a point. And it has to do with a farmer who had a great debt that he could not pay off. And the moneylender came to him and said, "Look, I'll propose a deal. If you allow me to marry your daughter, I will write off your debt." Now, the farmer had a young, beautiful daughter, and the father was horrified by this. And as he was thinking about it, the moneylender bent down and picked up 2 pebbles and put them in a bag. And he said, "Let Providence decide on this. Have your daughter reach into the bag and take one of these pebbles that I put in here, because I put in here a white pebble and a dark pebble. If she takes out the dark pebble, then she will have to marry me, but I will write off your debt. If she takes the white pebble, she will not have to marry me, and I will still write off your debt. If she chooses not to do it at all, I will throw both of you into jail until the debt is paid off." So the farmer felt cornered, that he had no choice but to agree. Now, meanwhile, the daughter watched the moneylender bend down to pick up those pebbles, and she noticed, she had sharp eyes. She noticed that he picked up 2 dark pebbles. She knew that he was cheating. And so she thought to herself, what am I going to do? If I play along with this, it doesn't matter which pebble I take, it's going to be dark. And I will have to marry him, but my father will have his debt paid off. If I choose not to do it, he will throw both my father and myself into jail, and we'll never be able to pay off this debt. And if I take both pebbles and bring them out and expose that he cheated, then he will seek retribution on us and vow revenge and make our situation even worse. What should I do? Doesn't look like any of you are interested. So I won't even bother telling you the rest of it. Are you interested? You want to? Well, I'll tell you a little bit later. Friends, what I just shared with you is what's considered a trickster tale, or I'm sharing you the first half of a trickster tale. Most cultures throughout time have had trickster tales. I mean, you go back to the ancient Greeks with Aesop's fables. Many of his fables were trickster tales with the crow or the raven or the fox. You know, you go to Native American stories. They had many trickster tales with the coyote. Even in the Deep South, we had the Brer Rabbit stories. In fact, just a side note, my first parish assignment, one of our parishioners was the granddaughter of the author of the Uncle Remus stories of Brer Rabbit, right? Joel Chandler Harris. A trickster was someone who was either devious or mischievous, not bad, but mischievous, or innocent. They were usually represented by a person or maybe an animal. They were always in a crisis situation. And the one thing that was very consistent with the trickster tales is that the trickster was one who was the underdog, the weakling, the one who was oppressed by a top dog or someone more mighty, more powerful, someone who was oppressive. But as weak as the trickster was, the trickster made up for it in being clever. And somehow in the crisis situation, the trickster was able to think of something to get out of that situation and to bring down maybe a notch or two the mighty and to lift up himself or others who were lowly. That's what we have here in today's gospel. Jesus is sharing with us a trickster tale. It was very much part of Hebrew tradition. In fact, Jesus was sharing a series of stories. You know, we only get parts of it when we come to Sunday Mass, but we've been listening to Jesus telling stories for the last couple of weeks. If you remember, Jesus was telling the story of the lost coin and the lost sheep, the lost son, aka the prodigal son. And what Jesus was doing is he was answering a challenge that was placed on him. Jesus was associating himself with tax collectors and sinners. And the scribes and Pharisees were pointing this out and saying, look at this man. He's eating and drinking with sinners, the lowly, the oppressed, the weak. And Jesus then shares these stories. Those first three were really about the people to whom he associated. This one that we hear, Jesus directs to his disciples, reminding them to whom they are to minister, to associate with, to be part of the lowly, those who are oppressed, those who are weak. Because that's to whom Jesus spends his time. It was the Blessed Mother who says of God that he casts down the mighty from their thrones and he lifts up the lowly. There's a word that's used both in the prodigal son story as well as in this story that Jesus has used. Squander. The prodigal son squandered his father's money. The steward squandered his master's property. He didn't swindle it, he squandered it. You see, when Jesus would talk and tell these parables, my friends, it was always about God. It's not about the prodigal son, it's not about the father, it's not about the steward, it's not about the master. It's about God. That in their actions, in the characters of the story, it reflects something of the nature and the character of God. In the case of the son, when he came to his senses, he goes back to his father. What does the father do? It's not just the son that's squandered, but the father squandered. He rushes out to embrace his son. He doesn't even wait for him to come. He goes out to him. Prodigal means spendthrift, wasteful. It means to squander, The father squandered his love on the son that spent all of his money. In the case of the steward squandered his master's money for the poor and the lowly. And the master commended him. In other words, the master squandered his judgment on the steward and commended him for what he did. He lifted up the lowly. That's what God does for us. We are unworthy of God's time and attention. We are unworthy of God's love. We are sinners. We are the lowly, the weak, and the oppressed. But God squanders his time and attention on us and lifts us up. He dines with us today at this altar. That's the good news, my friends. That's what Jesus was saying to those scribes and Pharisees and to his own disciples. He's saying that to all of us today. We who are unworthy, we who are sinners, have a God who loves us and embraces us and lifts us up. You want to know what happened to the farmer's daughter? Well, she went in and reached into that bag, and she took one of the pebbles. And when she took it out, she dropped it onto the ground where there are millions of pebbles, and she said, "Oh, how clumsy of me." That's okay. Just look in the bag, and you'll see the one which I didn't pick, and you'll know the one that I did. And so the moneylender commended her, right? He outsmarted him because he didn't want to confess that he was cheating, right? So as a result, she didn't have to marry him, and her father's debt was written off. That's what Jesus is doing in today's gospel. He's lifting up the lowly. He's casting down the mighty. He's embracing us with his love, squandering it. We need to celebrate that. And then in turn, in our gratitude and thanksgiving, we need to share that with others, to be Christ-like and squander our love to each other. Because as Jesus said about the steward, one day we also will have to pay a full account of our stewardship. God bless you.